the note-taking document in the chat for today, and you can follow along with us, starting with some relaxing music to go with our theme today, taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And I'll keep putting the info in the chat in case folks don't get it right away. But we're going to go ahead and get started. If you don't mind, if you could put your name, your role, and your location in the chat to share out. We'd like to know where folks are coming from today, so we can see where everyone's joining us from and what your role is in education. All right, Luis, if you don't mind moving us forward. We thought it'd be fun to do our introductions how you see us. I don't have to read all of my information, but my name is Melissa Spaden. I'm Director Systems of Support in Learning and Leadership Services.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Felicia Singleton. I am also Director of System of Supports on the Student Services and Program side of the house. So one thing Melissa and I are very proud of is that we are working very hard to work in alignment with the curriculum and instruction side along with the student services side. So, and you see right there some of the things that I am responsible for.
Hi, hello, wonderful participants. My name is Luis Lopez, and I'm an equity and culture teacher on special assignment in the Curriculum and Instruction Department at Sweetwater Union High School District. I mainly work in systemic SEL and supporting equity-centered MTSS, as well as restorative practices and implementation in improvement science.
Thank you, Luis. So we're going to open up our meeting with the land acknowledgement. We were so excited last week. We neglected to do that, but we really want to give tribute to those who've been on this land. So I have a specific land acknowledgement that I like to use, and I hope you find it, I hope you enjoy it. And if you want a copy, I'm happy to share it with you. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. Today, we gather on the ancestral lands that carry the footsteps of the Kumeyaay and Luiseño people. The Kumeyaay and Luiseño people have stewarded this land for centuries, and this land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. We pay respects to their elders past and present as we launch the Adult SEL Session 2. We acknowledge this legacy and we find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay and the Luiseño people.
Thank you, Felicia. So we're going to do a breathing activity. We got some great feedback last time that our session was relaxing, and that's one of our goals. So I'm going to put on, if you're not familiar with this song, it's Marconi Union. It reminds me of something that would be at a spa. It's very relaxing, Marconi Union Weightless. And it's actually proven through research to slow your heart rate. And I can't even tell you how many times this song has sort of saved me in a professional setting when I just needed to take a minute, but I didn't have the ability to go anywhere. So I'm going to play a little bit of it, and we're going to listen and breathe in harmony with the earth. I'm going to assume as it gets larger, we're inhaling. As it gets smaller, we're exhaling. Okay, thank you all. Hopefully that slowed your heart rate down a little bit. It's an 8-minute song, and we'll share all the links with you afterwards as always. I highly recommend De-Stress Monday too. It's a great resource that has all kinds of activities like this.
Right. So thank you, Melissa. I needed that today. I feel like I need it all day, every day. But so today, as we know, we're continuing our conversation about adult SEL. And one thing we wanted to really focus on and highlight is that SEL is not something that is done in isolation or in a silo. And I like to say SEL is not an a la carte, right? It is something that has to be embedded in what we do in our lives and in our practice so that we can be much more effective in seeing the benefits from SEL, not just for our students, but for ourselves. And this next slide is a crosswalk between SEL and restorative practices. And the reason why we thought it would be super helpful to have this here today is because so many districts, so many school sites are doing a lot of work around restorative practices. And what we don't want to do is feel like that SEL is the next shiniest new initiative or one more thing on your plate, but there's really a lot of alignment with these practices. So this slide really highlights, if you look to the left, the restorative practices, the principles, the structures, and the relationship building actions, and then across the top, the SEL competencies and how they align. So again, what we want to do is show you that you're probably already doing a lot of the SEL work, but when you see it like this, you see the connections and you don't have to feel like that you're adding more on your plate.
So today's we're going to talk about adult SEL. Want to just acknowledge the context that we're in. You know, take a moment to reflect. How has your life changed since we moved to distance learning? You know, because we might still be in a state of grief. We're grieving right now the loss of social connections, maybe our old habits, and maybe a sense of security, right? And some of us are grieving either the sympathetic loss for others or have the loss of a loved one that we're carrying. So as we do this adult SEL work, just to take a moment to acknowledge that we all might still be in grieving, and our time and need for support is very heavy right now. Wanted to pass it over to Melissa as well.
If you're anything, well, I think we can probably say that most people have in some way been affected by this. And it's important to keep all of these things in mind as we take a look at this next slide. You may have seen this before. We like to frame it as, you hear a lot lately of we're all in this together, but we know that's not true. We may be going through the same storm, but we're not in the same boat, and our boats look very different. As I'm learning, depending on what county you are in this state, it looks different depending on which state you're in the country. Friends, you know, my age getting vaccinated in another state when I, know that vaccination might not happen for me or, my partner for quite a long time. And so just thinking about what does your boat look like right now? What does your neighbor's boat look like? What does your colleague's boat look like? And if you don't know what your colleague's boat looks like, I think that's a really good example of having an understanding of what our peers, our colleagues are going through. And then what does your student's boat look like? So we're going to take a minute. You have this prompt in the in your note-taking sheet to think about. But what does your boat look like? How would you describe it right now? And after you've had a minute for some think time, if you don't mind reflecting and sharing in the chat if you're comfortable, and we tend to use a little bit of humor with this part to deflect from some of the current struggles as well. When you're ready, if you want to go ahead and share in the chat. And Luis has also set up a Slido again this time. So if you'd like to share on Slido what your boat looks like, if you go to slido.com and you type in 4684. And 4684 will be the code for our session today.
And you can also use your camera. If you have a phone, you can scan the QR code and it'll open up also.
Thank you. And I just wanted to kind of share with it too that I'm observing a couple of staff meetings recently, and I've seen some staff meetings that start, we're all in the boat, we're all in the same boat, we're all in this together, and that's how they start. But when I hear that, it also doesn't acknowledge how different our boats are, right? So I appreciate you guys sharing. Some of us are single parents, some of us, we're on our own, and some of us have different living situations. We have different access to different things, and so all our boats might be different. And just important to acknowledge the differences that we have. So thank you guys for sharing what your boat looks like, so we can gain a sense of empathy for each other.
I like the tugboat. Still floating in isolation. Like certainly holding me up, but there's water washing in. I feel that one. It's been a choppy ride. And I'll share, last time we talked a little bit about some of the welcoming activities or the engaging activities to use with peers or to use with colleagues and teachers. And this is one that we have used in our assessment group before that has really great responses because it's both personal, but easy to add some humor to. And it's great when you can also respond anonymously. So this is one that we've used that I highly recommend because it gets people to reflect, but also see sort of what others are going through. We've had very elaborate responses in the past about shipmates and who the captain actually is, and whether it's a yacht or a tugboat or a dinghy. So all of those sort of pieces it's really helpful to have something that, again, people can feel comfortable entering the conversation and contributing to, but it doesn't feel very personal.
And looking at the chat, there just a couple of additional responses. My boat is still afloat, but has been a choppy ride. Again, tugboat, lots of pulling and pushing. My boat is stable. And then, of course, water rushing in. So that takes us over to the SEL critical practices. These critical practices were highlighted by highlighted in CASEL's reopening guide. But in reality, we know that these practices are critical before the pandemic, certainly during the pandemic, as we toggle back and forth between in-person, hybrid, reopening, re-engagement, renewing. Like, I can't think of all the RE words that have come out of this pandemic. But one thing COVID has done is really illuminated what we've all known to be true, right? That we have to make intentional time to cultivate the relationships and design opportunities where adults can connect, heal, and build their capacity to support students. What comes to mind for me with this is like the restorative circles. In a lot of schools and districts, it's like everybody go circle up in the classroom. But when the adults get in their team meeting, their department meeting, or their staff meeting, there is no opportunity for them to connect and heal. It's really leveraging the power of two rather than the power of width. So your administrator's talking to you, your department chair is just talking at you or to you, but you all don't know what each other are going through. There's no time to connect and heal. And this slide really is said really well by the next slide. Dr. Johnson Trammell, she's the superintendent of Oakland Unified School District. She says, in this moment of great uncertainty, it is imperative that we model grace and compassion and how we are all struggling and adjusting to this new reality. That's going to be imperative, not just for the next month, but for the next year, given what we are all going through. So again, our students aren't the only ones in this pandemic, right? We're in the pandemic. Some of us are working or in our professional roles while we're educating our students at home. So we really need to have some grace. And when we have grace with each other, that really has to spill over to the grace we need to have for our parents and our students as well. Like grace for everybody. You get grace, I get grace, everybody gets some grace right now.
I know at the district level, sometimes get called in to go in and set up social emotional lessons for students. But I always got to backtrack with the leadership team. What kind of supports do you have for the adults, and how's your adult climate? Because we kind of tend to want to fast forward and go straight to let's go help our kids. And I do understand that urgency, but how important it is to have this space for staff healing occasionally and have that strong staff culture that you can then model for the students, right? Great for us, great for the kids. So this brings us to this systemic overview, right? We don't want to look at every single piece today, but just to kind of think about what are barriers to high quality SEL sometimes, right? And we tend to look at poverty is definitely something that causes gaps, as well as implicit biases and our discipline practices, as well as trauma-informed staff, right? But today we only want to focus on the gateway, educator stress and burnout, because our capacity to be able to deal with these systemic issues first has to do with our ability to have breathing room and space for us to reflect on these things, right? So not saying that one is more important than the other, but thinking about how can we create breathing room for us to look at the systemic issues.
So again, this brings us back to SEL critical practice number 2. So allowing space for connection and healing among the adults. We cannot emphasize this enough, that we have to prioritize this. And one thing that my friend and colleague Melissa has said earlier this week, we're not talking about self-care in a shallow way, right? We're talking about intentionally ensuring that we are taking care of ourselves and that we're building trust. The only way to really build those strong connections is to build the trust first. So you can have those conversations. You can ask those high-risk questions because you've built some trust in the community. And then also 2.2, ensuring access to mental health and trauma support. Look within your system and see what the flow chart is, or how do you access services, right? There needs to be more than just a flyer for EAP, right? When we're talking about a multi-tier system of support, we're talking about SEL being in our system. How do we ensure that not just our students and families, but the adults in our system have access to mental health and trauma support?
I'm going to take you guys into some misconceptions about educator self-care. As I know that sometimes we tend to think about maybe a narrower focus on what self-care is. So think about how we can expand this definition, especially during this pandemic distance learning situation, right? Because in reality, there is no universal definition, right? It could be exercise, mindfulness, meditation, relaxation. So it doesn't always have to be defined as some specific health promoting activity, right? It doesn't need to always be overtly healthy, right? Anything that's self-soothing can be helpful. Like I keep a box of chocolates, right, in my cupboard, and okay, I don't overly indulge in them, but I know that when I need some soothing, I'll just go ahead and grab one of my chocolates or a truffle, right? And even something like having a wine Wednesday, right? Some people would push back on that. Well, doesn't self-care have to be completely healthy? Well, this is why we're in the adult SEL session, right? It's about having that borderline of, well, where is it an indulgence, and where is it healthy, and where is it just being detrimental to our health, right? So it might not always constitute something that's health promoting, but hey, if it makes you feel good, right, and it makes you feel better and it's soothing, why not give yourself a little room to enjoy these kinds of things, right? And I want to pass it also to Melissa. Did you want to say anything on that one before we go to the next?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but thinking about how to meet your needs, and that looks different for each person. And we talked about, our boats are different. Well, our contexts are different. There's a lot of things that I would love to do for self-care that are just not possible in a, small house with a 1.5-year-old. Puzzles would be wonderful. I don't have that freedom. So thinking about what you're capable of and what you can do in your space, but also I think we're very lucky in San Diego, and so taking advantage of our environment as well, even if it's taking a step outside during the day, just seeing the sunlight, because some of us end up, I call this my cave at times, not even going outside. And so just thinking about what it is that you can do, whether it's building in breaks between classes or meetings, and just ensuring that you're doing that intentionally.
And part of it is too is to acknowledge, to avoid blaming burnout on educators, because although these are effective tools in our toolkit, right, which is why we're all here, is the ethical responsibility of educator self-care. It does not diminish the importance of effective school leadership, parents being involved, reasonable salaries, benefits, right? Student accountability, all these things that support us, right? We understand if we have high expectations, we should also have high supports, right? It becomes that shared responsibility that we have between administrators, parents, families, policymakers to really understand, to support the social emotional needs of our students, right? We can't be superhuman. We also need supports to be able to do that work, right? We can't be expected to save the world in these kinds of conditions through the miracle of self-care alone, but it's just part of the puzzle, right? It's within our toolkit, and just to frame it as such. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about that super educator, the one that worked in an inner city school and sole-handedly, without a team, just lifted the entire school up in the community, and then went off and did a bunch of projects after school where they built up the community, and then they came home and they were like an awesome parent too, right? I think it was a movie, right? Because we all know that we got to stop having this expectation of the superhuman educator, right? There's another pandemic that I've seen spread across. It's called comparavitis, right? Where we're being constantly being compared to these glorified models of these superhuman educators, where in reality we can't be a super teacher, a super parent, partner, and a super friend. And something's got to give in all of this, right? So self-care can make a difference, but it shouldn't be used as a weapon against us, right? Or to justify these superhuman expectations. Okay, and I'm gonna open it up also, Melissa, Felicia, if you wanted to add anything to this before we go on to the next point.
I think, yeah, I think our next step is a little bit of reflection, right? One of my favorite quotes is comparison is the thief of joy. And I'm always reminded, especially right now, to not compare how others are doing, because again, our boats are all very different. And so I think reminding ourselves of that, and that you may see one teacher burning themselves out doing that super teacher kind of mindset, and it's because that's their coping mechanism as well. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. That shouldn't be the expectation, but if we see that happening, think about the why behind it, behind that behavior. So on our Slido, we have the question, what do you do for self-care? And just take a minute. What do you do? How are you taking care of yourself right now? I love the image. Getting out, taking walks, cooking and baking. Virtual game nights, I love that. Distance visits with friends, yoga, baths when possible, getting to the beach, gardening, going for walks. See another one. Oh, Jill, this is a great point. Burnout is real. In some countries like Switzerland, employees can actually be diagnosed with it and by law must get time off from work and it must remain private. Does education take this into consideration? And I'm not talking about 3 months off, which does not exist anyways. That's very true.
No, that's a great point, Jill. And even it's not even just education. When COVID first happened, I went to we were just all stretched trying to write guidance and trying to act like we knew what we were doing. In reality, we didn't. We're in a pandemic. And my primary care physician said, I wish I could put you out for burnout. But we've been authorized, we've been told from the top that we can't take anyone off work, right? So it's not even just in education, it is in our society, in this country. It's like that is dismissed. It's not acknowledged as being something that is real and how it, negatively impacts us. So I'm very happy you brought that up.
Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for contributing to that. I'm just going to share this from my favorite chat group, Pandemic Pedagogy, which I find fascinating. And one of those questions about what is your leadership, what is your administration doing to take care of each other? I think it's really important to remind us that we have a shared responsibility to each other, right? So we need to think about the expectations and the things that we're asking of each other and our teachers, and acknowledge that while teachers, we can really change students' life and have such a great impact. I know it feels like schools are being expected to do everything, right? Everything has been falling on schools. And so the supports really need to be there if that expectation is going to continue. So a few more quotes that get this across. Just thinking about we need to make sure that we're not expecting teachers to save the world under conditions through the miracle of self-care alone. So ensuring that there are there's time to have interactions that are collegial, that are, in a safe environment, that there's access to adequate resources. And again, it's not just sending out an email about VBA, it's ensuring that teachers know what that healthcare or mental health flow chart is, that we know exists for student referrals. And so helping educators think about what those are as well. And ensuring that we all know that we all have challenges, that we need to think about what our strengths are, but we also need to ensure that we're not letting it, like Louis said, be a weapon used against us, that there are so many things happening in our lives right now. We've surpassed 500,000 deaths related to COVID, and we know that that's an undercount. There's a national, it's grief. We're feeling grief, a collective grief for what's been happening. And so not acknowledging the circumstances through which we are living and expecting those to be put aside to take care of others is not going to get us through this. So I want to take a minute to show you this video. I watched it and I just thought, wow, that's so perfect. And think about how we are practicing self-care or not. So Luis, do you have that pulled up? There we go. Thank you.
What are some of the ways that you practice self-care?
I don't. Oh boy.
That's definitely a skill I need to get better at.
Self-care is hard, especially in this profession.
However, my focus has been to get outside more, do more engagement with our environment.
Cranking up the tunes in the kitchen, cooking something delicious for my family.
There is more to life than just work, even if you really enjoy your career a lot like we do. I don't grade papers at home. I don't check my email very much at home, and I'm a better teacher when I have established healthy boundaries with work and leave work at work.
So one of the ways that I practice self-care is being able to say no. Sometimes you have to be able to take a step back and refresh before going on to that next project.
1-minute meditations. I just close my eyes, take a deep breath, and try not to think too much about what happens. And when I open my eyes, I feel much better.
Try to turn your brain off and let it be quiet sometimes.
Disconnecting from technology and distractions and spending time with the people that I love the most.
Before you assist others with the oxygen mask, assist yourself first. I like to exercise and be with my family, but yeah, assist yourself before assisting others.
I think it's really important to give myself the time to be creative. Even actually really digging in and researching is creative for me.
I play piano in the evenings. I read a book. I try to take time that is both being still and also being active.
Spending time in prayer, practicing yoga, or even spending time outdoors, like going boonie stomping around the jungles of Guam.
Fresh air and movement are key to restoring my sanity and perspective.
I get up before anybody in my family when it's still dark outside, and I go to the gym on some mornings, or I go just sit and have some quiet time to myself.
Or I am going for a walk, or I'm reading a book, or I'm taking a nap on the weekend.
I practice self-care by traveling. Sometimes it's good to get out of our bubble.
My best mode of self-care is to learn from my students. I've learned patience, I've learned empathy, I've learned the latest dance move.
To reach out to other teachers, share experiences, and have somebody to bounce ideas off of. It rejuvenates you and helps you reignite that passion for teaching.
I thought that was a good way to just remind us that everybody struggles with this. It's probably part of why we're in education, because we focus so much on caring about others. So Luis is going to talk a little bit about burnout.
So I've been hearing this conversation with a lot of teachers I work with about feeling like we're not doing enough, right? The sense of enoughness has been very prevalent recently. And it's just kind of to take a moment that we're doing more than enough because we're here, right? So this kind of comes from this concept called the burnout cascade, where we will experience emotional exhaustion. And because we're just so emotionally drained, we kind of detach from things or depersonalize them just it becomes part of our task list. And we know we can do more than just fill a task list, right? We know we can put ourselves completely into what we do. But when we don't, we feel like this lack of accomplishment, right? Like I'm not doing enough. And then it makes us feel worse. And then it just cycles through over and over until we have this really big feeling of not enoughness, right? So what we can do with this is just acknowledge it, right? That right now our cups, a lot of it is being asked of us right now, right? A lot more is taken from our cup than actually filling it up, right? So it's just something to consider that in this very extenuating circumstance, in these challenges we're facing, how can we fill our cups up emotionally, right? What can we do to make sure that we avoid this depersonalization, to fill our own cups, or to help ask for support in filling our cups up?
So what we've done is provided you some suggestions to prevent teacher burnout. But one thing we don't want to do is overwhelm you with this list. We know everyone's at a different place. So what we recommend is we just invite you to read through them. See what resonates with you, and then maybe commit to one or two and see if you can, make that commitment and then see how it impacts your life, hopefully in a positive way. But we don't want you to feel like, oh my God, now I have this 8 or 10 things to manage as far as self-care. That's not the intent. These are just some invitations and some suggestions. And when I look at number 1 and think about this, you have your internal document you may want to write, but just thinking about taking care of yourself first, right? So when you get up in the morning, for some folks that works. If you have a toddler that wakes up really early, that may not work for you. So maybe it's in the evening when you've put your toddler to bed, or if you're caring for an elderly parent, or, just find those pockets of time. This suggests in the morning, but maybe it's midday, maybe it's before you go to sleep at night. And then Luis is going to tell us a little bit about his extensive planner, his schedule.
Yeah, I really took number 2 to heart, really having a planned way ahead of time. And, a lot of times we think of having our time scheduled out as being constraining, where I kind of see it playing defense with my time. If I know that I have certain obligations, right, when I have all this scheduled out, I have the power of no, right? I have the power to say, these are my boundaries. This is what I'm going to work within. And I'd be happy to help you. I'd be do anything that you need within this time frame. But after this time, I'm going to dedicate time to my family and also to myself, right? Going back to those ideas of things that fill our cups up. Really big on having that passion project. I have my weekend passion project where I'm just going to fill myself up so I could be there and show up for all the people that depend on us, right? For all of this work we do. So we're going to send you a copy of the schedule in spreadsheet format if you'd like to create your own. So you can create your defensive schedule as well. And something else to talk about, I know meal prep means different things for us, and for some of us work and some of us, not so much, but just the way that you can kind of think about that nurturing ourselves is so important. And for me, meal prep just means having more control before being in a distant situation predominantly, be more fast food or just on the go, but being at home has actually allowed me more control to maybe look at the things I have ready available in my pantry, right? That's one way that I've been managing this. As well as keeping a gratitude or silver lining journal. Doesn't always have to be written, right? For me, it's just counting my blessings before I go to bed at night. It kind of helps the sleep cycle kick in, right? Let go of some of those anxieties.
I'll share one of the things that we've done for meal prep, because it's constantly having to think of just what are you going to make? What are you going to eat? What are you going to buy? And all of that planning as we took the plunge and we became CSA. So the farm, I can't remember what CSA stands for now, but we got a membership to a local farm. And so each week, every Thursday, we get a delivery and we figure it out from there. And so it helps. I think one of the things is, I'm not sure what the exact term was, but decision fatigue or decision burnout, where, teachers make so many decisions within one day, but just in general as an adult, they call it adulting, but it's just that intensive decision making. And so we found it's great because it's fresh, it's local, and we no longer have to decide what to buy. We just have to figure out what to make with what's given to us.
Thank you, Jewel, for that tip in the chat.
Thank you, Jewel. Community supported agriculture. This one I find very important. If you do have people at home, or if you don't and you have trouble with that border, that barrier between work and home, like so many of us do right now, really intentionally creating space to recharge, to decompress, wherever or whenever that is. Luis has linked this article from the New York Times, crying in your car counts as self-care. Commiserating with other parents of young children. This has been a thing that we've discussed. More specifically, a lot of people have talked about the Target pickup for some reason, where you go to sit in your car and get your pickup orders, but just that alone time wherever it is, as sad as that sounds, it's, it's a reality. And some people, when you have multiple people in the home, whether they're young, old, just getting away and having that quiet is just so underrated. And then prioritizing those healthy choices. It doesn't mean that you have to have the calorie counting app, but just ensuring that you are taking time for yourself. I started wearing my Fitbit again because I realized I'm back to like 500 steps a day, which is just terrible. And working within what you can control. So for me, it's sticking to a consistent bedtime and wake time. That's what I can control. My physical activity, I'm stuck in this room a lot, but I can control when I go to bed and ideally when I wake up, although usually it's before then. And we'll share this list as well afterwards. Setting realistic expectations. There's a lot of conversation about never being done. But I think a lot of it is practicing that self-compassion and saying, like, this is your deadline for getting this done. We need to just be forgiving with ourselves as much as we are with others. And so I don't know if you've ever had this practice where you think about what you would say to yourself and ask yourself what you would do if a friend said that to you. And if that's something that you wouldn't still be friends with that person, then you stop talking to yourself that way. And so ensuring that those expectations and that kindness that you're having is for yourself as well as others. And then those healthy boundaries, so that do not disturb. I love that teacher who said, you know, I don't answer emails after this time. I personally took all of my work notification apps off my phone because this is plenty. Having this here is plenty. And feeling comfortable saying no to things that are outside of your scope of work, but also outside of your hours and your bandwidth. I hate that term, but we can't keep saying yes to endless projects and still feeling like a human being.
2 words that have really helped me during this time is systems and boundaries. You know, if we wanted to keep it just so simple, systems and boundaries.
Thank you, Melissa and Luis. One thing that I tell my team is that we're not transplanting organs here. I mean, yes, the work is important. It's critical in some cases, but it's not a 911. So again, systems and boundaries, do what we can, but pace ourselves. So with that, compassion fatigue is another word that comes up when you hear about burnout. But compassion fatigue is a little bit different because it's when you're fatigued because you are giving so much to others, right? Chronic use of empathy. Another term that is known with, or that links with compassion fatigue, is vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. So you're wanting to help. And as educators, whatever your role is, we're in this profession because we want to help people. But when you're trying to navigate through a pandemic and you're trying to help yourself and help others, it becomes, the weight becomes very, very heavy. And I love this quote here, is that the expectation that we could be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to walk through water without getting wet. What's touching our students is also touching us, and we need to be able to call that out and be okay with it.
Just kind of add to that too, the concept of compassionate detachment. I remember working, and all of us that are here are at some level working in the social emotional realm. And we work with students who experience trauma. I remember working to a level where I was bringing that trauma home, and I did burn out, right? I did burn out. I had, my break came and I got sick, and it made me realize that, you know what, sometimes compassionately detaching is okay, because we're going to deal with some very heavy stories. Also working on the suicide prevention committee and things like that. There's this point where I'm going to detach from it, not be cold, but just detach from it, just so I can preserve my emotional bank account as well. And very important, don't forget to reconnect with the things you enjoy. As we mentioned before, those things bring us back to life and filled our cups up. And most importantly, be kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace and just know that you're doing a great job. And thank you guys for being here.
You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Melissa.
Okay, and this is a breathing activity. It's the shark fin. You could follow along with this. It's another moment too, and we've been talking a lot, so we can take a moment to breathe as well. So usually we can do this 7 times and just notice how we feel. So we take a slow breath in, and then we bring one hand up to our forehead like a shark fin. Right, and then slowly move your hand down to your chest as you breathe out. Move it back up as you breathe in. Now try that a couple times and just notice the difference in your state. Okay. So now that we've created a little bit of space, right, we really want to bring this back to the circle of control, the circle of influence, and the circle of concern, right? And just take a moment to reflect, because this is something that is helpful in times like these when it seems like a lot of things are out of our control, right? To think about the current situations that we're in, the current challenges that we have. are they in our sphere of control in the middle? In other words, are they things that we have the final say on, like we're the decision makers, we determine the outcome? Are the things that we're challenged with right now, are they in our sphere of influence? In other words, are the issues that we can influence, although we can't determine the outcome, we can at least inch away, or hopefully with a little chipping away, we can bring them into our control? Or are they things that are out of our control, out of our influence, and really just concerns, right? Matters that are out of our control, beyond our ability to influence at all. Because what can you do with something you can't do anything with? I know that's a lot to say, but just to kind of take a step back, that if it's not within our control, can we accept it? So within all of the handouts and activities that we're going to give to you as part of our reflection packet is a step-by-step activity that can help you think about the circumstances and concerns in your life that could possibly be within your control or influence. So we invite you to do that activity, and also to share it with people who might be really struggling with things that are out of their control, and bring them into our circle of control, right? Or at least acknowledge what is within our reach.
So I just dropped this link in the chat. We want to bring this all back to obviously the SEL competencies, and think about what is in our locus of control, or what the SEL competencies look like in our context. So if you click on that link in the chat, then you should be able to open up this document. It'll ask you to make a copy, and I encourage you to save this, because this is a great tool to have and to share with others. And it's the competencies in action, essentially. So it's looking at those 5 areas that we discussed last week, and thinking about what do each of these look like in your context. So we're gonna ask you to open that and just take a moment to skim through. This document integrates CASEL. It integrates the Committee for Children. It's an organization that focuses on equity and social and cultural competency in SEL, as well as the National Equity Project recommendations. And so if you take a look and scroll through, we have the competencies on the left for you, the social and personal skills related to each competency. And then we ask you to just take a moment to think about what this looks like in your context. So we know that folks are coming from the classroom, from charter school office, from the district office, from all sorts of different contexts. And so we wanted you to just take a moment and choose one competency and think about what do those areas look like for you in your context, and also what's within your locus of control. Right? What can you do? What can you work with to improve any of these areas, or to teach to these areas, whether it's adults or students? And how can you work within this to create change for yourself as well? Because just a reminder, we need to make sure that we're engaging in these practices ourselves and not just expecting others to do them as well, because it's good for us too. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to look through, to think about these, and then to share out a little. So hopefully you had a moment to reflect. I think for me personally, looking at that document, which I've looked at it so many times, but one of the areas I think I'm constantly thinking about and trying to improve on is the reflective listening and building consensus, because right now with so much happening and so many deadlines, I am very task oriented and deadline oriented, as my colleagues will well tell you. And so for me, it's taking the time to pause and realizing that it will get done. But creating consensus and ensuring that all voices are heard is an area for me to consistently reflect on and improve in. I don't know if anybody else wanted to share in the chat. Felicia's going to take us through a process now in brief that we hope that you can use more in depth with your teams as well.
So yes, looking at the clock, it will be very brief, but I will introduce it. The next slide is about cognitive restructuring. And really what it is doing is disrupting that negative self-talk. So, and because of COVID, at least in my world, I see people, on Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, because the perception is that as long as I'm in meetings and I'm busy, I must be productive. And that's not necessarily the case. Also, it gives you the opportunity, this cognitive restructuring to, as you're completing tasks or you're giving work to your boss or you're contributing to your team, if someone doesn't necessarily, if they have a pushback, if they have some wonderings or some questions or suggestions, it doesn't have to turn into, I suck, my work sucks. It doesn't have to go there. So cognitive restructuring is just a way to disrupt that distorted thinking and start to help us have a more positive response and think through it so that we're not impacting our coworkers and other folks with our moods. So this is the process. And I'm not going to go, you can read it, but really it's, if you have a negative response or something that you see is not favorable, first thing we need to do is just calm ourselves down and just take a moment to breathe. And essentially don't take it personal, right? So we have to get out of ourselves, get out of our own head and just really pause and deeply breathe. And then step 2, really describe what was it about that situation that triggered that negative mood, right? So that we can learn to identify what that is. Step 3, analyzing your mood means taking the moment, and this feels like a lot, but this can really shift how we show up and how we respond, but really taking a moment to journal or to write down, what did I feel when my coworker said ABC or when my boss gave this feedback? What is it that I'm feeling? And really the mood should be a one word, right? Not a big giant thought, but I was frustrated or I felt embarrassed or I felt inadequate, really identifying what that mood is. And then moving on to step 4, writing down those automatic reactions. So what do you automatically do? I'm not good at this. My skills aren't as good. I wish I was like, right? That comparativitis. So really identifying what you would normally say automatically or think automatically. Next slide, please. And then step 5, find that objective supportive evidence. So really taking a moment to say, okay, what happened in this meeting? What decision was made? Was I really ignored or it's really a fact-finding process. So it's taking the time to really be objective and see exactly what is happening. And then what I love about this next one is step 6 is find that contradictory evidence. So you're stuck in your head, but identify and write down something that contradicts your automatic thought, right? So you don't suck at data. You were top of your class in your qual class or your quant class, but really starting to disrupt those negative self-talks. And then step 7, identify fair and balanced thoughts. So really looking at both sides of the situation and calling in a coworker if need be, and have them give their feedback so that you're not, again, stuck in your head. And then lastly, monitor your present mood. Really by this point, you should have a better grasp and idea on what triggers your moods and how you're contributing to that and what you need to do to shift that moving forward.
Thank you. And, just to reflect, what are the thoughts that no longer serve you, right? If they no longer serve us, can we put them away? And just real briefly, toxic positivity. I didn't know it was a thing until I heard the term. Is at times, can we be overly optimistic? And is that really teaching us resilience, right? We take a playbook from emotional intelligence. we can see that sometimes just kind of being real about things, instead of saying things like it'll be fine, is how can I help you, or you should smile more, asking if everything is okay, right? Just wanted to kind of bring this into your forefront, and that we can take a look at this and probe this a little bit further, maybe in another time. But just think about, am I being overtly positive or too pessimistic, or am I in that in-between spot where I'm being present? Okay, something to reflect on.
And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, setting up for the next slide, we really put this slide in as an example of ways to show up for yourself. So on how to avoid toxic positivity, I think about Brene Brown and silver lining everything. And if you haven't seen that video, we'll make sure that we get it to you in the resources. But if not this time, by next time, it's okay not to have an answer. And it's okay to not know, but just having that connection with someone is sometimes what people want, not always having an answer. And that takes us to our next slide, which is a video that we thought would be super helpful in reminding us on how to show up for ourselves.
Today we're going to be talking about showing up for yourself. So when there's a lot going on in our lives, in the world, when it feels as though there's just no more space in our mind, it's really tempting to let go of the things that are most important to us and the things that are going to keep us healthy and well. And now more than ever, it's really important that we focus on those things that are going to keep us healthy and well. So as much as possible, if you can, find a time to meditate. Find a time to step out of the thinking mind, to rest the thinking mind, and just be present. Make sure you're taking time to exercise if you can. Most of the gyms are closed down. It might mean going out for a walk. It might mean going out for a run. It might be doing something at home. But whatever it is, make sure that your body is getting some kind of physical movement. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Sleep is so important. It's important to our immune system. It's important to our cognition. If you don't get enough rest, then you're going to compromise all kind of different aspects of your health. Eating, right now, eating's going to be difficult for all of us, and we may not get everything that we want. But continuing to eat as healthily as you can is going to be a really important part of staying healthy and well. And then finally, finding a sense of play in your life. In the middle of a global pandemic where so many people are suffering, and maybe people really, really close to you are suffering as well, play and a sense of joy can feel so far removed and perhaps even unnecessary in our life. But if we can find even a couple of moments in the day where we smile, maybe even laugh, find something that brings us a sense of joy, that has a very real impact, not just on our mind, but also on our body. So just making sure that you're looking after yourself. Remember, it's not selfish. It's not just for you. It also benefits the people around you as well.
If you're not familiar with Headspace, I highly
Today we're going to be talking about showing up.
That's my favorite guy, Andy. So to quickly review, because it is 4:30, today we've walked you through a nice breathing activity, explored the intersection of restorative practices and SEL, talked about what our boat looks like, reviewed critical practice 2, designing opportunities for adults, a little bit about self-care and preventing burnout, focused on our locus of control, thought about how to apply the SEL competencies, discuss cognitive restructuring and showing up for ourselves, and applying to your context. So as we are closing out today, Felicia's going to take us through a quote, I believe. If you don't mind putting just, I don't know if we'll be able to do the Slido, but if you'd like to join us in the chat and set a goal for a new self-care strategy that you're going to try out this week.
And we're just going to leave you with a quote by the great Margaret Wheatley. Relationships are all there is. Everything in the universe only exists because it is in relationship to everything else. Nothing exists in isolation. We have to stop pretending we are individuals that can go at it alone. So we really, really thank you all for coming today. And we hope this quote resonates with you. If, like, again, COVID has shown us that we need each other. We need that connection. We can physically distance, but we need those social connections still. And it starts with us and within our own sphere of influence. So thank you so much.